I wound up recording a lot of the intimate details of, buttons, switches, mechanisms, that sort of things in what I thought at the time was a replica simulator of a lunar module. And it turned out that I was standing in and recording the mechanisms of the simulator that saved Apollo 13.
Cinetherapy Podcast with Sam and Mitch.
Welcome to the Cinetherapy Podcast by Inland Film Co. I'm Mitch Williams, sharing hosting duties with Sam McGhee. This is episode 15. In this week's installment, we sit down with a special guest, sound designer Alex Knickerbocker. Alex discusses his experience as a Hollywood sound designer and his experiences working on Hollywood feature films like Man of Steel, Spiderman Homecoming, Netflix's Bright, and more. Alex tells us how he changed paths early on from music to eventually sound recording and design in film. We hope you see and hear this episode as a fun change of pace from the typical stories about visual storytelling as we dive deep into the importance of sound in filmmaking. Enjoy.
I guess actually I should do a sync clap too. All right.
Good.
Hopefully that'll be helpful somewhere.
Oh, beautiful. We'll make it happen.
Frame accuracy is important here.
Exactly. So, thank you for hopping on this call today.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
I think we should, we'll just start by asking you to maybe introduce yourself. This is, I'll just state, this is Alex Knickerbocker we have on with us. Alex, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, where you live, all of it.
Well, I'm living in Los Angeles. I make weird noises in dark rooms alone for a living. I guess the official title would be re-recording mixer. I have been in post-production sound for film and television for about 10 years, something like that. Have gone from the trailer world to television broadcast, major motion pictures, dabbled in radio a little bit back in the day, and have done a lot of advertising as well. So kind of a little bit of everything, and originally came from it's sort of like the production side of post-production sound. I recorded sound effects and managed a very large sound effects library for a major facility for something like 7 years before kind of jumping into the mixing side of things, and have kind of gotten the full spectrum of recording, editing, mixing, delivering, whole pipeline. So that's kind of what I'm doing now, is the very tail end of that.
It's an area of the filmmaking world that we like to say we pay close attention to, but we have no clue what we're doing. We try to show that we care, which we do, and we I think we get it. What, I don't know. We pass.
We pass. We're getting there.
In the mantra of "we'll fix it in post," this is like the most "we'll fix it in post" area of post-production.
Absolutely.
So that's about right.
So how did you? I think one thing that I was really interested in when we first started talking is your story of how you got into this realm of making sounds for movies. How did you get to this?
Sure. So it started back in my childhood. I grew up playing piano and thought I wanted to do something like that professionally. And as time went on, I realized, no, I kind of like it more behind the glass. I want to be on the other side of it and recording instrumentation, recording artists, and recording music. And about halfway through, I chose to go to college for that. And about halfway through the curriculum, I realized, this isn't quite what my forte feels like. It's not the direction that I thought I wanted to go in. What else is out there? And I like to think of that as the halfway college, like midlife crisis kind of moment for me. And fortunately, about a week after I came to that realization, I was introduced to post-production sound, and I went, oh yeah, this is what I'm wanting to do. So fast forward a couple of years, I moved to Los Angeles. I had no connections. I had no real leads on any kind of work. I managed to land a job through Premiere Radio, which I guess is a subsidiary of Clear Channel. They've rebranded to iHeartMedia at this point. So I was working for them in their network operations center. And I just started cold calling people and trying to get in touch with people whose work inspired me in the filmmaking world and people who I wanted to emulate professionally and creatively, stylistically. And one of the guys that I happened to get in touch with, he was oh man, what was the connection? I think he was the part-time foreign exchange student, sort of, I guess. Let me try and rephrase that. There was a foreign exchange student that was coming in from Italy, and he, I guess, foster's not the right word. He hosted her half the time that she was in town, and the other half the time she was with another family who happened to be working at Warner Brothers for something, and I managed to get in touch with him, and it was this whole weird, convoluted thing. And I ended up connecting with this guy, talking with him a little bit, and it turned out that he was doing really high-budget, major motion picture theatrical stuff. And we connected we shot on the same cameras at the time. I was shooting a Canon 7D for fun, and he had a Canon 7D, and we went, oh, that's kind of neat. So we started talking about that, and about a year and a half went by of going back and forth regarding sound, regarding film, regarding camera work, etc. And finally, at some point or another, he called up and said, "Hey, we've got a spot open at this place, and it's got some cool stuff going on, and you should come down." So it's definitely one of those, right place, right time, right person. And I think the story with me is the story with everybody else, and that it's a little bit different, but it's all about being able to connect with the right people, and I guess kind of getting lucky and leveraging the skill set and all those different things kind of coming together.
Yeah. I remember when we first spoke on the phone, one of the takeaways that I had was it was just ask. Like that was one of the things that you were saying, is that you just asked somebody, like, "Hey, can I stop by, or can I help, or can I do anything?"
The real first contact that I'd say I made, this was back in 2009, I think. I was still in college, and I went to the theatrical release of a film called Drag Me to Hell, which was Sam Raimi directing, who I'm a big fan of, all the Evil Dead series stuff. He directed this film, Drag Me to Hell, starring Justin Long. And when I went and saw it in the theater, they had a whole bunch of interesting surround sound design stuff for these like demons moving through a house that really struck me as like, wow, that's really cool. I've heard things like this before, but this one really resonated with me for some reason. And I looked up the guys who did it. They were a pair of guys at a facility called the Dub Stage down here, Marty Humphrey and Chris Jacobson. And Marty had contact information out online that I was able to find, and I just shot him an email politely saying, I'm no one. I have no experience, no connections. I'm still in college. I'd love to talk to you. I want to learn. Would you be willing to jump on a quick call with me? Would you be willing to let me buy you lunch if I'm ever in town? And he was kind enough to kind of, I guess, take a few hours out of his day and really speak with me and kind of give me the first impression of the Los Angeles post-production sound scene. And that was sort of a jumping off point that showed me, maybe these people are willing to chat, and maybe these, really big industry greats in the post-sound world are also real people, and hopefully I can chat with them a little bit. And they were fortunately very hospitable to me, and I feel very lucky to have been connected with a lot of them. They've shown me a lot of great kindness.
Yeah, that's so rad. I love that. It's something that I think we try to reiterate with younger people than us that are looking to get in. It's like, you can say you're interested, but asking is the first step, but then it's also like showing up to that lunch and whatever. Certainly. And then it's continuing, it's a two-way, you can't expect, in our world that we're just going to be like asking you, come, whatever. Yeah. It's a two-way,
Oh yeah, certainly. Yeah, this is predicated on you have to be willing to show the interest and, as you said, show up every day, be there, not just early but really early, and make sure that you're going above and beyond. It's definitely, nothing gets handed to anyone, but if you show that you're willing to put in the work and that you're worth giving a chance to, people seem to be very open to that sort of thing. At least from the experiences I've had, again, people have been very forthcoming and very hospitable, and I think if the next generations that are coming up that are interested in this sort of stuff are really, they love it, they eat, sleep, live, and breathe it, and they want to be involved in it in as many capacities as possible, then they'll be able to make it happen.
For sure. So you've worked on, you said everything from television series to feature films. What feature films? I know there are some that you cannot talk about. So what feature films, would you say that you can talk about, that you have some experiences that you might like to share, that were just fun and cool? And then I might press you on some that you can't talk about, but frame them in a different way.
Well, be prepared for a lot of I can neither confirm nor deny. So I think the couple that jump out to me in terms of, I guess, coolness factor, the first one would probably be, it's actually not a feature film, it's an IMAX film. I think it's about 45 minutes long. It's called We the Marines, and it was shot and is now on display in Quantico. At the Marine Corps Museum out there. And it's basically a showcase of, sort of armed services capabilities, that sort of thing. And the production crew was really diligent about getting everything accurate and right all the way down to the sound. And so came to us and said, do you have any recordings of these really high-powered military vehicles that we might be able to use for this? And looked through. We've got a pretty extensive sound library, and I've been pretty diligent about making sure I know where everything is in that. And I went and looked through however many, I think it's 1.2 million sound effects, and realized, we have a good collection of stuff, but none of them are really complete sets that are going to give the full sonic vocabulary of a lot of these vehicles. So we asked to record them. And that led to riding along, doing full workups on a V-22 Osprey, a CH-53 Super Stallion, one of those 100-foot-long helicopters that when the classic Black Hawk helicopters break down, these are the ones that come and airlift the other helicopters out of, war zones, that kind of thing. And let's see, we got a very, very distant perspective of an F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, because those are still classified. You can't look at them from certain angles, that kind of thing. That was a little frustrating to go all the way out to, I think we were in Yuma, and it was very much, okay, well, you got to be over here, and you can't look at these things this way, and you can't record them from this close, and they're very, under wraps still. So that was actually a pretty interesting experience. And then got to do LCACs, which are the giant hovercrafts that can transport 10 or 15 Humvees apiece. They're enormous. Got to do a few of those. And I think the coolest one to experience was an AH-1Z variant, Super Cobra attack helicopter. And we got a whole landing pad to ourselves out in the middle of nowhere, and they just spent a whole afternoon flying 50 feet off the deck right above us and doing, various different combat maneuvers and that kind of thing. So that jumps out as pretty cool, I'd say. The other big one for me was I helped out recording an Audi for a movie called Spiderman Homecoming. Yeah. They had a car that they wanted a full workup on, and one of my friends' mentors really was helping out on the sound for that film, and he called up and said, we've got the need, and would you like to come out and help out with this? And I ended up getting out there with him, and there's a recordist that's sort of, there's the behind the scenes that is sound, and then within the sound community, there's the additional layer of behind the scenes after that. This guy has made his living recording sound effects for films since like the 70s. The big one for me that stood out in his credit list was he recorded all the planes for Top Gun.
Wow.
And, that was a movie I grew up with and was obsessed with because it was, it's just Top Gun. It's just that cool. And he was one of the other guys that was out there recording this vehicle. So getting to work with him and knowing that lineage was sort of a big kind of, wow, this is awesome kind of moment. So those are the two that really jump out as kind of the big, heavy hitting.
Yeah, that is awesome. I in terms of, recording helicopters and, things that fly, I imagine you're running into all these like random unknowns of crazy winds, so to speak. And, I mean, that stuff fascinates me because I'm like, I don't know what I'd do if I was holding this. But you're probably, I don't know. Those are like where my ignorance runs deep and where I'm like fascinated with somebody like you. And I'm like, so how do you do what you do? But you're
right. Cause we're going to film the helicopter and we're going to have a shotgun microphone pointed at the helicopter from whatever distance it is. And then that's the sound we're going to use later. So hearing you talk about like a full workup on a vehicle, I know I've seen some stuff on your own YouTube channel you've been walking through. You did a full workup on a car, didn't you? And that was that melted my brain. Trying to imagine all those sounds. What is a full workup
entail?
Yeah.
So effectively, if you watch a film, you watch a commercial, you watch anything that involves a car, for example, you have the bread and butter engine sounds that you might expect, but all the various other components and sonic characteristics that a car has are things that, at least at the major motion picture level, you need, because a featured vehicle is going to do everything from, people are going to be getting into and out of it, opening and closing doors, maybe popping hoods, opening up engines and seeing everything on the internal side of it, to all the maneuvers, skids, chase driving, that sort of stuff. And the big one that everybody kind of doesn't think about until they really need it is every single car in a movie will always have to park at some point. So getting a car that's going slowly in, stopping, getting the nice settling, all the various different metal clicks and creaks and stuff that are all really subtle, and then turning the car off and getting a nice clean, total shutdown. The air conditioning has to stop spinning. The car's, motor clicks and all that have to kind of settle down for a little bit. Nobody thinks about that sort of stuff. So it's, partially in my field, that's the kind of stuff that I'm focused on, all those little subtleties and intricacies, to make sure that a filmmaker has the option of saying, I really want to make sure we get this complete. It's kind of a complete idea of what this vehicle is doing. And when I say full workup on a car, it's all kinds of different mic perspectives, all kinds of different maneuvers, from, turning a car on, letting it sit and idle for a little bit so we have individual control over how, the car start sounds. Do we want it to be a really hard start where we're kind of pressing the accelerator a little bit and it already kind of kicks on so that it gives a really aggressive feel? Or do you want it to be sort of a normal thing where this is just somebody who's getting in a normal sedan and pulling out of a parking lot somewhere? You don't want that to sound like a Ferrari if they're driving a Toyota Camry. So things like that, differentiations like that. We'll do workups of pass-bys where you have, 10, 20, 40, 60 miles an hour worth of, cars driving by at various different speeds, various maneuvers. There's always the chase driving where you have weaving back and forth on a freeway, that kind of stuff. We actually go and record all of that in a totally separate capacity from picture so that we can choose which things we want to feature. We can choose which sounds are the most cinematic or the most, correct for the emotion of the piece. And by getting all of those different components, and by, I guess, the full workup thing is really the best way to describe it. Getting a full sonic vocabulary of a vehicle just allows for options down the line. And that's kind of the idea when it comes to vehicles. Same thing for helicopters and that sort of deal. It's the sounds are very different, and the I guess the environment is very different, but the process is very similar.
What does your workflow out on the field look like in order to, kind of have an idea of what you're going to pull up in post? Like when you're going to go create that library, how are you keeping track of each individual sound? Are you speaking into the microphone? Are you, just different things that I'm curious about.
Sure. So it kind of depends on the recording environment, the budget of the film, the subject of recording. If like for the Audi that we recorded for Spider-Man, it was basically 3 guys with a driver and, a few recordists, and we were able to kind of get microphones set up in large enough arrays and far enough apart from each other that we were able to simulate as though we had more people out there with more microphones. On bigger films like the Fast and Furious guys, a lot of the time they'll get, 10 people out there in various different places because those cars are heavily modified and have a tendency to do things like explode. So if you have a car that you only get one shot at capturing, you want to make sure wherever the sweet spot is, somebody's got to be there. And so since you don't quite know what that's going to be necessarily until you get there, having enough people, enough personnel, and enough mics, simply put, is a really huge component of that.
Are you do you own all of your own equipment and people are renting you and your equipment, or are you working with mics that are owned by the studios or the studio that you're yes and no?
It varies. It varies depending on the project. For my own kind of stuff, I've got my kit that I'll use for the higher budget major theatrical level work. Sometimes gear is provided, sometimes we'll rent stuff. It kind of varies. We did a gun workup for a movie called Bright for Netflix. The director of that is very in tune with getting correct firearm sounds. I think he actually has a military background, so that's one of his points of specific interest, and he wants to make sure that those things are authentic and correct. And so we ended up getting all 21 different firearms that were used in the film, and that required renting 20 microphones, 3, 4, I think 5 different recorders, and having a really, really complete full kit and set of perspectives for all those things. Because again, that's one of those, depending on the perspective in whatever shot you might be working against, you want to have the ability to say, I want this to be in your face and really punchy and powerful if it's got to be kind of a club you over the head with sound moment. Or if somebody is further back in the shot and you want it to feel that way, you want to have the ability to pick and choose those things depending on what else is going on sonically and what else is going on emotionally.
So with that in mind, like referencing or keeping on the firearms, are you also recording indoors and outdoors, so you have that perspective, or is that being fixed in post, so to speak? Like if if it was recorded indoors, is someone able to make it sound like it's outdoors afterwards, or are you going
that one? Yeah, definitely not.
I imagine. So you're probably taking them to different ranges. Excuse me. You go.
We have a few different locations that are sort of optimal for sound. Ironically, one of the most challenging things about recording, it's not just guns, it's anything with a large transient and then kind of a very long, quiet decay. But guns specifically, one of the big challenges is birds, because birds are not afraid of these huge, loud sounds, so they'll just keep chirping and doing their normal bird things. And you've got this enormous gun crack, and then it diminishes to something really, really quiet. And then you've got all these birds chattering over your massive firearms that if you're in a really intense, shootout scene, like there's a movie, I guess Shoot 'Em Up was one of my more, favorite films as I was kind of learning more about sound, because there's so much action, there's so much going on. In a crazy gunfight like that, or like The Matrix, you don't want to have birds chattering over, Neo coming in saving Morpheus or whatever. That doesn't quite fit the motif. So it's interesting that those kind of environmental things can be as challenging as they are and very unexpectedly. I think, well, specifically with those sorts of recordings, there's a specific style to capturing them because they are so loud in one part and then so quiet in the rest. I think when it comes to doing things like that, it really relies on your environment and getting the right space and the right microphones and the right setups while you're there. You can't go from an indoor range and expect to be able to make that sound like an outdoor space. It's a little bit easier to make the outdoor recordings sound indoor, or sound like they're interior, but in general, good practice is to get it right in the production side of it or in the recording side of it, so that you have to do less on the back end to make it sound correct.
Cool. You have any? Do you want to? Okay, I wanted to touch on. You've worked on a film where the people were not on Earth. And I want to hear some of catching the sounds for those, if you're able to, without referencing the film.
Can neither confirm nor deny that I've had any involvement in anything like that.
I figured that was going to be my answer.
A lot of movies.
There's so many movies out there, right, where people are not on Earth.
There are a lot of films and TV shows now that take place not as on the ground as perhaps they could be. I can say that for a project at one point, sometime in the last 10 or so years, I wound up recording a lot of the intimate details of buttons, switches, mechanisms, that sort of things I found myself standing in what I thought at the time was a replica simulator of a lunar module. And it turned out that I was standing in and recording the mechanisms of the simulator that saved Apollo 13, which is a pretty cool piece of history.
Very cool. That is very cool. It's I don't want to press you too hard on it. It's just something from our first call that I keep thinking about, and I'm like, it's just so freaking rad. You have this opportunity to go, I don't know, go places and see things and hear things that a lot of us don't.
It's interesting being in this field. It sort of puts you in environments where you can learn a lot and experience a lot that you never really thought you might, and paying attention sonically to those details, kind of not omitting visuals necessarily, but being more focused on the sound elements of things, opens up just another layer of learning about the world around you and provides sort of a different perspective.
I think as we get farther into filmmaking, and I'm getting more and more, I'm getting smarter in my understanding of how films are made. I'm noticing how much more significant sound is in the emotion that I feel as a viewer in a feature film. I think as a cinematographer, I've always been so focused on the beautiful picture that it's been hard for me to learn good storytelling, and then add on top of that, it's hard for me to learn sound, because I can throw in the most recent just commercial or documentary projects we're working on, I've gotten stuck on I don't want to send this over because it doesn't feel right. There's tons of sounds in there that there's a brewery that we're doing some work for, and there's all this machinery that you can see in the background, and you just hear an interview and it doesn't feel right. Something's not right. And so I'm going back into footage and trying to find sounds from when I was at least closer to the machinery, and I was just getting B-roll. But I'm noticing that things don't feel right if the sounds are not there. And so to hear you going into like full workups on all these different either helicopters, cars. I mean, space simulators. I mean, it's insane to hear how much work goes into making someone feel a certain way. I don't know.
I think sound is one of the biggest components in the emotional factor of storytelling, and it's hard to wrap your head around because it's not tangible. You can't see it. You only hear it and therefore feel something. And the way I kind of think of it is, and I think a lot of filmmakers in the sound world think of it, is you have effectively three big components sonically to tell a story. You have dialogue, you have music, and you have sound effects. And dialogue, whether it's voiceover or ADR or the characters actually talking on screen, that's kind of the backbone of a story. That's what's going to tell a story for the most part. Music tends to inform you how to feel about what's being told. So if you have, I think horror movies are a great example for this sort of stuff, because if you take away the sound from a horror movie, it's not scary at all. Nobody cares. It doesn't matter. You could have the most horrifying thing going on in, visuals, and if the sound isn't there to back it up, then it's not that terrifying. But as soon as the music drops out, you can hear every little detail of everything, and you get that sense of impending doom with quiet. And then all of a sudden, the big jump scare happens or what have you. Then that's the element that does make it scary, because it informs you that something's going on. I really don't like this. Whereas if it's just a visual, you kind of get, all right, this is going to be a scary moment. Yep, there's the thing. All right, nobody cares. Have you been watching Ari Aster's films? He did Hereditary and Midsummer. I've been meaning. I have a couple of screeners of them sitting around. I still need to.
Are you a fan of horror films?
It goes back and forth for me. There are some that I really, really enjoy. There are others, like the whole. I'm not really a big fan of films like the Hostel franchise or Saw, that kind of thing. I enjoyed the first one. The first Saw had some really interesting plot twists, and then the rest of it, it's just not really my speed personally. And I think
it's not mine either. And so it's out of place for me to watch either one of those Ari Aster films. But I bring it up because he plays on. There are no jump scares. The guy does not do jump scares. It's all story that drives. There are, like, plot points are horrifying, but he does play on silence a lot and little intricate sounds that are going on in the room that clue you in on what is going on that's not normal. And I think it's so weird to see such dark, simple pictures that wouldn't normally scare you, but then you hear these sounds going on. You're like, wait, what am I not seeing? And it just instills this deep dread. Yeah.
Sure. I think it's not necessarily for filmmaking. This is actually a video game of all things. When I was first kind of getting started in post-production in general and realizing, there's this whole sound for picture thing. What's this? I was kind of lucky enough to connect with a guy who worked on a game franchise called The Sims over at EA. And they brought me over and let me tour the facility and showed me around stuff. They had another company working out of their facilities called Visceral Games, and Visceral is responsible for the sound design behind Dead Space. And at the time, I think they were working on the second one, but they showed me a little bit of footage from the first one, since they had all the access to everything. And there was one moment at the very beginning of this game. I think it was award-winning on many different subjects, but sound in particular, where you're walking down these hallways and the music is really kind of droning and it's got this dull pulse to it. Every couple of seconds you have this kind of, dull thud going on, and it just keeps tempo for this whole section. And as you're walking down all these corridors on this empty, terrifying ship, you realize that that dull thudding is getting a little bit more of a top-end component to it. You get some high-end frequency, and it sounds metallic, and it starts, getting louder. And you round a corner, and you realize that this thing that you thought was music this whole time is some guy down the hall hitting his head against a bulkhead until he kills himself on it, which is, in the video game, it's horrifying and scary and really, really effective. And I think that was one of the standout moments for me of, you can really blend sound design and music into this whole other entity that, if you do it right, it can be one of the most effective storytelling tools there is, because it gives you that, at least in that moment for me, it was like, oh, that's been going on the last 10 minutes. Oh, no. Oh, that's horrible. And it just brought a whole other layer of it to bear. And I think finding moments like that, because it's all about supporting the story when it comes to sound. It's all about further telling the narrative that is being captured on screen. But having moments like that, I think, are really important and really, I guess, helpful in impacting an audience and immersing an audience in an atmosphere.
Yeah. Are you that's crazy. I was gonna ask, are you someone, probably, I imagine, in the sound world that has to have, high quality speakers in front of you in order to watch a film, or are you okay with, because I imagine you're probably wanting to hear the full extent of things, just like we want to watch something on a 4K OLED.
Certainly. No,
Sorry, go.
Definitely. I definitely think that it's important to get the full sonic experience, because that's, theatrically, when it comes to, again, major motion picture stuff that, Netflix is great in its convenience, for example, but you don't get captured and drawn in the same way. There's definitely a time and a place for setting something up on an iPad and just letting it go and being okay with that. I think that's how a lot of people are consuming content these days, and that's fine. I think for real depth in storytelling, the environment that you watch or consume that story in has a really big impact. And I think there are some films that should be seen theatrically. There are some pieces of content that need to be displayed on a big screen. It's in the visual world. It's kind of like if you take this, grand, glorious landscape photo that when you blow it up to wall-sized, billboard-sized, it looks amazing and it's deep and it's impactful and it's incredible and it's awe-inspiring. And then you put it on Instagram and it's this big and no one cares. Yeah, it doesn't translate. So
I watch films on our TV in our living room, and I connect my Bluetooth headphones, not this AirPod, but my Sony WH-1000X, whatever, and I feel like I get a pretty solid sonic experience with those on, way better than any audio that I get coming directly out of my TV.
Sure. So fun. Well, I don't know if this is fun. Sort of nerdy thing that might be fun depending on who you are. It's fun for me. I don't know. Whatever. When these big motion pictures come through on larger scale, larger dub stages, that sort of thing, they'll do a theatrical mix that will go and screen in theaters around the country or around the world. And then after the fact, they'll do another whole separate mix specifically for home theater and home deliverables. And they kind of call it a forever master in a lot of ways, because at that point, it's not necessarily going to screen in theaters again. It's only going to live on streaming services or DVDs or Blu-rays or, whatever the next iteration of the technology is going to be. And so they'll put this mix up in these giant, theater-sized dub stages and get it sounding right there. And once they're done with it, they'll bring it down to a much smaller level and bring in totally different speakers to simulate a home environment, and even put on headphones and do a whole separate mix for that to make sure all that work still translates. So what you're hearing on those Sony headphones or on your TV speakers is very different from what ended up being, well, I won't say very different, but it is a different and better translating mix to that environment. Because if you tried to put a theatrical mix into headphones, it's never going to work. So you kind of have to tighten things up and do it a little bit differently to fold it down properly. So it's, again, just a hidden component of the workflow that maybe people don't think about as much.
And again, a reason why I like to say there's a reason credits always roll at the end of a film. You know?
Turns out there are a lot of people involved.
Right? My gosh, you know, it's insane. It's so freaking cool though. It's like, I don't know. I like not being the expert in, or thinking that I could be the expert in everything, because there's always somebody else better. Yeah. You know, the day that.
Well, it also gives you a chance to focus on things that you really want to be good at. I think when I was getting started, I wanted to be a generalist. I wanted to be able to do sound editorial. I wanted to be able to do music. I wanted to be able to do mixing. I wanted to be able to do dialogue editing, all of those different components. And the more time I've spent working in various different capacities, the more you realize it is actually better for the films, the filmmakers, the creatives in all aspects, whether it's advertising or television or, you know, anything else. It does better justice and does more justice to a project to have somebody who's extremely good at one thing do that one thing really, really well, than to have somebody who's all right at a bunch of things do an okay job at a bunch of things. So that's, you know, I think that's what separates really high budget motion pictures from a production quality standpoint from you know, people who are trying to do too much necessarily. Obviously, you can definitely get away with a whole lot more now than you ever could before, and the technology and the tools have opened up a whole world to independent filmmakers and to people who want to get their hands into this stuff. It's very accessible, and you can get great quality content with comparatively a smaller investment of time and money and personnel than you could even 5 years ago, 10 years ago. But it's still, from what I've seen, it still serves a project infinitely more to have more of the right people doing their individual crafts than it does to have, you know, just one or two trying to handle everything, because it just gets to be too much to manage. You know, you can only do so much. And
absolutely, it is insane though how much has changed in this industry in the past 10 years. I mean, how much is available to us, you know, I mean, you know, even
certainly
from a just a music standpoint, the fact that we have libraries like MusicBed and Artlist that are relatively, you know, inexpensive compared to years ago, you know, I mean, it's crazy. Yeah. The cameras,
that
the cameras.
I was going to say the cameras.
The microphones that we, you know, can use on a cheaper scale. Not cheap. I don't know if cheap's the right word, but it's crazy.
Well, it's interesting. The gear. The more time I've spent messing with different microphones, with different recorders, with different gear, plugins or software, you know, whatever it might be, the more you realize the higher budget stuff, it just tailors your source material so that you have to do less work on it after the fact to get it sounding or looking how you want. And it gives you a lot more flexibility. Like you can get great sound out of a little Zoom H4n recorder with the built-in microphones if you wanted to. Like it's no matter what you buy in that realm at this point, pretty much everything is going to sound okay. It's not going to sound terrible for the most part. But, you know, why buy a Shep's microphone for $3,000 when you can buy an MXL microphone for $90? Well, the Shep's is going to allow you a lot more flexibility, and it's going to sound exactly the way you want it to start off with. Whereas something on the lower end of the scale and sort of the lower budget range, it's not going to sound as great. And so you're going to have to do a lot more work on it to try and get it up to par. And Microphones are interesting because there is definitely a cutoff threshold where you can only get something sounding so good before you do have to step up in budget. I mean, it's kind of like an iPhone versus shooting on an Arri Alexa, for example. Obviously, one is going to be way more flexible and better than the other. But in terms of resolution, they have similar capabilities in terms of the size of the picture at the very least. And so there's this sort of weird threshold where you can kind of justify using one, and you don't necessarily need to go, $100,000, $200,000 rigs to get really good content. You can get really cool stuff based on something in your pocket. And sound has, to a different degree, the same kind of thing going on.
To that point, I noticed there's an ad for the iPhone right now, shot on iPhone. It's a snowball fight, and it does start off by saying it does say shot on iPhone, but Mitch was noticing there's a lot of snow that feels like that's too perfect. That was definitely added after the fact. There's all these sounds, there's all this stuff, and what I like about that is that it's not saying this is all iPhone straight out of camera thrown into an ad. This is us using an iPhone as the camera in a production that still has all the CG and still has all the sound design and stuff. And you get lost in that ad.
Right.
You forget that this is a phone. Because production value is all
that's pretty
still
amazing.
At the same level. You just swap out the camera and
They did a lot of things to distract you.
yeah.
In the best way. In the best way.
Sure. I think things like that definitely showcase that there are components and pieces of technology that have come a really, really long way in recent years. And it also shows that doesn't make up for or compensate for having great production value everywhere else too. So yeah, if you try and cut budgets or cut corners on everything, it's that's going to falter at some point. There is definitely a cutoff, but at this point, we have more access and more tools and more options in that realm than ever before. And, again, I don't think it's about the gear anymore. I think what has happened in the last probably 10 to 20 years of technology coming out is it's showcased people's creativity and allowed that to really be the center point rather than limiting people by the gear that they're using.
Yeah.
And I think that's really good in a lot of ways because it takes away the boundaries of, well, this is lacking in production quality in the first place, so it's never going to look or sound as good. Now you can get great stuff even if you have, low to no budget, and you can still do really creative things that do translate in a lot of ways. And it opens up a whole other world that didn't really exist in the same capacity as before. And overall, I mean, a lot more people are creating things. It's definitely hard to kind of differentiate yourself now than it was previously before all this technology was in our hands. But it really does, it differentiates you based on your creative intent rather than your production value. And I think that's kind of at the heart of filmmaking in general.
Yeah.
I think that's the more important component of it personally.
Yeah, I think storytelling, that's the basis for cinema, and I think that with all of this quality content being put out because of inexpensive gear and access to so many things, I think it's allowed people who couldn't have told stories. It's allowed them to tell stories on a way cheaper scale than a big budget film. And I think if they're a good story, they're going to rise to the top. Like people will see their film, even if they saw it on Vimeo, and that was the only way for them to get it out. It's allowed somebody to use that creative inspiration like you were talking about and go and make something.
There's a great example of that is a movie called Primer. Are you guys familiar with Primer? It's worth checking out. It's not an easy sit down and just have a story handed to you and you just get it. And you're like, okay, great. That was a fun action film or superhero movie or whatever. It makes you think, and it demands to be rewatched a couple of times to really understand what happened. But as far as I remember, it's basically two guys that decided they wanted to make a movie, and they shot everything on like a handy cam for under $6,000. And it's out on Netflix. If I remember right, it was on Netflix last I saw it, but I think it's on streaming platforms still in whatever way. It's one of the most intriguing, interesting stories there is, and it's gotten a lot of attention for such a low budget sort of thing. And it shows that, it has to be the right project. You can't make an Avengers movie for $5,000. It's not going to work. But you can definitely tell really incredible, compelling stories and have it translate well without having to, take out your life savings and your family's life savings and, $150 million worth of personal loans, etc. To make something great. I think it's just
that's
a
awesome. Sam's writing that down, and he just looked it up on IMDb. We'll have to watch that. Are you familiar with Jim Cummings' films? His only film so far, but he has a bunch of short films. He did a short that went to South by Southwest. I think it won Sundance as well for shorts, called Thunder Road, and that's a.
Oh, okay. Heard of, haven't seen it.
Yeah. And then it eventually, 2 years later, he turned it into a feature film, and it's incredible. I mean, just how he's been able to do things on small budgets. Most recently, he just wrapped filming for his next feature film, but he used WeFunder. It's similar to Kickstarter crowdfunding, to help go support and produce that film. And I just think it's freaking rad. We live in a sweet
Absolutely.
time. I wanted to ask about your YouTube channel, if you could tell us a little bit about that. I've watched a couple of your videos just out of my own intrigue.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask about your YouTube channel because I know I started following you because of Gene in the YouTube world, Potato Jet, but Gene was already weird on YouTube in the sense that he was Hollywood level commercial stuff on YouTube, and that was strange that you were seeing Arri Alexas, you're seeing Red cameras, you're seeing all this stuff that he's talking about using this stuff for Hollywood productions, but he's doing it on YouTube, and I felt like I was getting so much insight into this. And then I started listening to your stuff, and I thought, this is weird that somebody's talking about professional level sound design on YouTube. Oh my gosh. And I've watched through your videos and immediately implemented, I haven't done a full workup on a car yet, but I have immediately changed a lot of the things that we've been doing here for our commercial stuff and our documentary stuff. So why did you start on YouTube, and what what are you doing?
Well, at the end of the day, I Gene and I have known each other a long time, actually, and he kind of, has made a space for himself in that same way in the visual world. And with the sound side of things, there's a reason that nobody's really talking about it yet in that way that I would really love to bring to the table and have been growing and building for this entire, last however long it's been. It's most of the people in the sound community are working so much and doing so many things that they don't have the time to dedicate to that stuff. And in a lot of ways, the films that they're working on, they're so demanding, they're so secretive, they're so kind of closed off to that sort of stuff that it's sort of a niche spot. It's a very tenuous place to try and do anything in. But I realized after talking with Gene and kind of looking around at a lot of the other sort of school of YouTube filmmakers that are doing stuff, sound is so incredibly challenging for people to just kind of break into because it's so technical immediately. With cameras, at the very least, you've got an iPhone, you can run around doing that sort of stuff. But as soon as you start getting to picture sync and you start trying to say, okay, well, why doesn't this sound professional? Okay, well, what do I need to add? What do I need to subtract? Well, that means I have to do Foley. All right, what's Foley? Oh, it's footsteps and it's hand pats and it's picking stuff up and it's throwing things around. And okay, well, how do I record that? I have to record every single one of those and it's got to be in perfect sync. Okay, maybe I'll stick with something else. It's just so deep so quickly, where I think visuals, because they're a little bit more easy to understand right off the bat, it lends itself a little bit better to visual learning. And I think with YouTube, I really want to kind of bridge that gap between the professional level of where, people are operating every day in the major high budget level. I'd like to bring a few of those components to people who are just getting started and trying to understand that, because it is a really deep, crazy thing to try and wrap your head around, and it does take years to really figure out, kind of like any art form, I guess. But the technical boundaries, in my opinion, are a little bit higher in the sound world because of the because of the demands of what it takes to get something sounding pro. Visuals have become a little bit more accessible faster from an understanding perspective than sound has. So long answer, but short answer is I want to try and bring pro level techniques and skills to a little bit more of an understandable level, so that people can, at the very, very least, just get a little bit better sounding stuff and elevate the quality of their content a little bit higher, so that, when you're listening to something back on headphones, S's aren't ripping your face off.
Right.
And you're going, this hurts. Why does this hurt to listen to? Let's show you how to tame that. Let's show you how to bring a little bit of an interesting atmosphere to certain things where it needs it, and give at least the idea of what tools are out there, so that people can take their own creativity and run.
The other thing I've noticed is that it made, for me, it made you the expert. I started to realize, this is not something I want to invest too much time into myself. I don't want to just keep one man banding this. We need to start hiring sound designers. That just starting to listen to you get into the technical aspects of sound design and even the philosophical, emotional aspects of sound design, it made both of us in on this being a major role we're going to need played in any of the big ideas that we've got on the list now. Sound designer. It wasn't on the list until we realized, holy cow, that's too much. That is awesome. So that's something that I've always known, educating your clients on why, what, even we want all of our clients in the commercial world, we want them shooting video. We want them having video on their channels. Let's show them how to at least get something, even if they're just doing it on their phones. But while we're educating them on how to do it themselves, it's also giving them the understanding that we're the expert and they should just pay us to do this. And you're educating the masses on the technical sound, how making sound seem simple or making professional sound seem simple has given us in a commercial film shop the understanding that we need to hire an expert to do this.
And I want to clarify, we're not the definitive expert,
right?
we're
right.
in the face-to-face conversation, the two parties in the room.
Right. I would hope
with
that
the client. I know.
Across.
I just want to,
Yeah, that's a direct. To be honest, that's a reference to something we've talked about here on the podcast. In my background in photography school, one of the first things that I started in was weddings, and it's something that one of our business professors would talk about is at the very least you should be encouraging everyone to take photos. the potential clients that you have for weddings, you should encourage them to be taking better photos and showing them what to do and showing them how to use their cameras and teach everybody how to use their cameras, because not only does it make what you're doing more engaging, but it also reminds people that you do know what you're talking about, and there's a respect level of your knowledge that kind of comes into play. And so that's something that I've always reminded myself of from photo school. But it's something that I immediately felt from seeing your presence on YouTube as a sound designer. It gave me an enormous level of respect for not only what you're doing, but what all sound designers are doing. And now I'm watching films even more in depth, listening to the sound.
I think it's definitely again, a hugely technical and creative field to try and work within, and having somebody who is very passionate about it and really, has tried to make themselves an expert in that realm. Even just from a workflow standpoint, it frees up, you as filmmakers, it frees up your creative abilities to focus more on your craft and getting your components of it correct, and trusting somebody who really has that same level of passion, same attention to detail in the sound world. It gives them the ability to bring all of that to the table in the same way. And so you get 2 or 3 or 10, or however many people who are really, really good at each of their individual tasks. You bring great people together doing great things, and you're going to get great product out of it. You're going to get great content out of it. Where if you were trying to manage it all yourself, we can all only do so much, and realistically, something has got to give at some point. And wherever it is, you're maybe not as knowledgeable as you are in something that you're really, really intense into. That will probably falter in some capacity, and that's just the nature of people. It's the nature of work. That's how it goes. So I think there would be a lot of sound people that would be very happy to hear you say that. I think it really does facilitate great content and great working relationships to have people who understand where they sit in the creative process and what their skill set can do for a story or whatever content you might be working on.
Yeah, it's rad. There are a couple things, because I want to be respectful of your time. I wanted to know, what would you tell someone? You're creating a platform with your YouTube channel to potentially give people a space to come to and learn without being intimidated. And I think you're doing a great job at that. And so what would you tell someone who's thinking about getting into that space, and they might be
YouTube specifically, or content creation in general?
On the filmmaking side, commercial or commercial, documentary, feature, TV, whatever. Somebody that might be sitting in your shoes in college thinking you're going to go down on like the music route, and then you have this epiphany that you want to be behind the glass,
Sure.
What would you tell them? And then I think I wanted to just know if there was any like kind of just crazy experiences that you've had in this Hollywood world, in the LA scene, or if it's what your experience has been like being down there, and then probably wrap with you might not have a favorite director, but maybe favorite audio sound
favorite sound supervisor,
sonic
favorite recording mixer,
explorer.
the most specific kind of behind the scenes celebrity. Yeah. So as far as people who are maybe just getting started or considering breaking into the sound for picture space, it is a whole different world than something like music for sure, but it is accessible, and the tools that we're using in this world translate a lot between really anything else to do with audio, whether it's podcasting or audio books or music recording or whatever. If you have some experience with something to do with sound, you'll be able to bring it in. The other part of it is in terms of getting into the film business specifically. A lot of people would tell you to just keep making films and just keep making content and just keep shooting stuff for, what have you. And that's super important. I would say another really big component of it is collaborate with people. Be open to collaboration, be willing and chase down people to work with, whether it's sound specifically, or you're getting somebody to do sound for a film or a commercial or whatever you might be working on. Get used to the idea that you want more people to be involved. You don't necessarily want to have to do it all yourself, because while that does afford certain benefits, it also detracts from the grand workflow as a whole and doesn't allow you to focus on getting the specific necessities that you really want to, be totally invested in correct. If you have somebody that you can bring in that you can trust to do a great job in any other capacity, it doesn't have to just be sound, but in any other capacity, knowing that you can rely on them is going to be hugely beneficial. And a lot of, I'd say most of the great work that gets done in, the big league Hollywood sort of stuff only happens because you have a real deep level of trust between a director and a sound supervisor or a DP or a cinematographer, all of those different people. It's all the relationships that they have, and knowing that you do great work, I can rely on you, I can, we have the same vision, we have the same ideas, or we can benefit each other throwing ideas back and forth. So I want you on my team because it'll elevate the creative and the aesthetic or sonic properties of the content. And so that's the that's the thing, I guess, is
collaborate. I love
collaborate.
That's a great word.
As far as
I was just wondering, that's another thought I've seen. We follow people across the country and film in the film world, and that's not limited to Los Angeles and New York. It's across the states, it seems like. And the few people that I personally follow in, based out of LA or New York, if they post a Instagram AMA, I see people asking, should I move to New York or should I move to LA? And I think the answer is always like, you can find people to collaborate, where almost anywhere, like wherever you are, there's probably somebody. It's just that there's more access to certain things. And so with you moving to LA, I was wondering like what your experience has been like there. And then also, just if you've had any, we always like to hear funny or crazy stories. And if you don't have anything funny or crazy from your experience, whether it's on a production that failed or something, I don't know. It's just then no worries. But I do think that it kind of dovetails from the previous question. For somebody who might be looking to get into sound, do they need to move to LA to do that? Or what your thoughts are and around.
Sure. I mean, Los Angeles is still, at least in my opinion, kind of the hub of this type of work. And there's more opportunity here. There's more work going on here in general than in pretty much any other one city or one region in the country or in the world necessarily. That being said, you don't have to be here necessarily. It just makes it a little bit easier to network with people who are of a similar mindset. There are way more creative / filmmaker types here than there might be in, I grew up in a little small town outside of the San Francisco Bay Area, and there were definitely creatives there, and there were definitely people who wanted to be in filmmaking there, but it was, 1 out of 1,000 people wanted to do that. Whereas here it's 999 out of 1,000 people that want to do that. So it makes it easier to find like-minded people, I think, and find people who are interested in creating similar things or working on similar projects. I would say in terms of getting started, I mean, the guy that, well, this ties in with a fun, crazy, maybe, coincidental story. I don't know how fun or crazy anything that I say is. So I always just assume it is not.
I think all of this has been fun for us. I'm fascinated. So,
well, that's good. That's how it's supposed to go. So as I was kind of getting towards the tail end of my college curriculum, I was sitting in a cafe down the street from the place I was going to school. It's up in Emeryville. I think it's now a branch of like SAE or something. I had gotten introduced to post-production. I'd kind of spent a little bit of time learning the very, very basics of it, which the college system in a lot of ways, they do teach you a lot of interesting stuff, but from at least the education that I got, it was a little bit more rudimentary. And when I got down here, I realized, oh, this is a whole other world. That's kind of crazy. But I got just enough knowledge and I was passionate enough about it that I chased a lot of stuff down on my own in terms of information. I was sitting in this cafe talking with one of my friends from middle school about what I was doing and some sound stuff. And he was kind of interested in music. So we were going back and forth on some workflow stuff. And I happened to mention that the software I was working in, Pro Tools, behaved a very specific way in certain, different workflow environments. And that getting audio out of it in one way was actually not the same as doing it in a different way back in, whatever version it was. And this guy sitting next to me at a totally different table leaned over and was like, you sound like you know your Pro Tools stuff. And I went, I'm going to school. I'm certainly not like an expert in any of this stuff. I want to be, but I'm not there yet. And he went, we should talk. And fast forward 10 years, he's been one of my points of contact to get work from and have collaborated with him on I lost count of how many projects. We've had films go to Sundance and South by Southwest and TIFF, and he was the one that initially convinced me to move to Los Angeles to pursue all this stuff 10 years ago. And it just so happened that I was talking about Pro Tools in a coffee shop, and that's how we met.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So it's things like that. If you live, eat, sleep, breathe this sort of stuff, and you are willing to connect with people and willing to collaborate on things and willing to kind of throw yourself and immerse yourself into the environment as much as possible, you'll probably eventually find yourself in Los Angeles or New York in some capacity. But I think it's become less of a necessity to be there starting out than it used to be.
Yeah.
So
no,
that answers the question.
And then I think the final question was, who do you admire the most in your field? And if you do have a favorite, film or filmmaker, director, whatever, great.
Sure.
But I think if you stay specific to sound supervisors, that's a whole another, like, that we've never talked about sound supervisors. I can guarantee you that on this podcast. So it could give somebody that potentially is listening someone to go look up and find some films they've worked on.
Sure. Well, man, that's hard. There are so many incredibly talented people and people doing amazing work in all of these realms. It's probably harder than ever to pick a favorite, because a lot of these people are personal friends, and they're all so good at what they do, and they're so talented and have been so good to me personally as well.
Then I don't want to.
I don't know that I could answer that even if I wanted to. Lead you into question with the question where you have to pick a favorite. I'll tell you.
Possibly some of the films.
I'll tell you the couple of guys. I'll tell you the couple of guys that have had the biggest impacts on me. I think getting started, one of the people that I look to most and who I still consider a close friend and mentor. His name is Eric Norris. He was sort of responsible for getting me started in the big leagues to a degree, if you want to call it that. And he and I worked together for the first time for real on a movie called Man of Steel. So that was kind of the break-in point for me. I think in the mixing realm, one of the guys that I've had more proximity to lately than any of the other mixers that are doing great work around town is a guy named Frank Montano. He's sort of a legend of the community, and I think for the filmmaking community at large, maybe he's not a household name, but you look up that guy's credits and it's just, you have seen his work, you have heard his work, and it's been amazing. And he's an incredible guy, so he's definitely up there for me. I think, again, there's so many people who are doing such incredible stuff. For the sound recording thing, I would definitely say John Fasal, who's the guy that recorded for Top Gun, among many, many others, and another guy named Charlie Campagna. Charlie has recorded a lot for the Fast and Furious films. He did a lot of stuff there's a movie called El Camino for the Breaking Bad franchise. He was in, I believe it was Arizona, recording a lot of stuff for El Camino. He's done some incredible work and has taught me a lot. I think those are the big ones that come to mind immediately, but there are so many
Absolutely.
really good people.
That's super cool. Are you what's your you have people that you admire and look up to? I mean, would you say that, do you want to be a sound supervisor someday? Is that a goal of yours?
It's sort of evolved over the years. I think people get really set on one idea, and I think that can be really good in a lot of ways. And it's also, you should allow for change where change seems like it's, the universe is pushing you in a direction one way or another. I initially, like I said, set out to record music and have ended up on this side of things, and have recently gotten back into recording music and doing that sort of thing at a higher level than I was when I was 10 or 15, of course. But if I had not allowed for the change into post-production, I wouldn't have learned all these different tools and skill sets and techniques to then translate back into something that I'm really passionate about that, I started out with. So there was that balance there. In terms of wanting to supervise sound, I think I'm definitely, I do that from time to time. I'm more in the mixing world at this point, but I definitely, stay within the sound supervising realm when I can. It's something that I definitely enjoy, and I would never say that I don't want to do that. I do find a little bit more joy personally out of sitting behind a console pushing faders. But I guess my answer is unexciting because I always enjoy all components of this stuff, and it's hard for me to pick one thing that I would like to do more than another. But at this point, I think I've spent enough time in the editorial world, and I've spent enough time recording sounds as well, being at the tail end of the pipeline, having it all come together, and being responsible for balancing all of those different components and materials to produce the final sonic product. I'm finding a lot of enjoyment.
That's great. That's awesome. We are about to hit our hour and a half limit that we not limit, but we're trying to limit ourselves. Hour and a half is a long time to begin with, but we went 3 hours with somebody once, and it's like, okay, we got to split this up into couple parts, and because otherwise we'll just sit here and talk all day because we enjoy meeting new people and having fascinating conversations with them. I'm super,
that's awesome,
grateful. We're both super grateful that you were willing to sit down and share a little bit about
thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it. It's awesome talking with you. Of course.
And it's also convenient that the AirPods were just giving a warning, or at least mine was, that it's like 10% ready to die.
Yeah, and this is also.
I can't say that I have that issue with these archaic wired headphones.
Like a white thing, wires. I think those
that
are.
thing hanging around your neck.
Yeah. Have you guys seen this before? It's called a cable, I believe.
What I like about this though, is that there's the one episode we're going to talk about sound is the episode that we have panic trying to figure out how we're going to record the sound and then how we're all going to be able to hear each other, and it was good. As you first started talking, I saw Mitch go over and hit record on the camera, and he's looking at me like, this is exactly what we should have expected to happen.
Oh, of course. It's always whatever that one thing is that you got to get right.
Yep.
It's on fire immediately. That's how it goes.
Well, thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Oh.
Yeah. And
Absolutely.
I anticipate we'll be talking more though.
Yeah.
I think
absolutely.
This is the start.
I would certainly hope so.
When we finish working on our documentary short film that we're really excited about.
Yeah.
And we've talked to you about our trip to Patagonia. We'll be possibly more than likely reaching out to you for some help.
Let's do some cool stuff.
And
that'd be great.
if I find myself down in Los Angeles, I'll be hitting you up. Sam was just in Anaheim.
Yeah. He commented on my Instagram story.
What the
we decided to ditch the family for Thanksgiving and go to Disneyland, and that was our first trip. That was our first family trip. My wife and I and our almost 4-year-old boy and our 1-year-old girl. It was our first trip flying with our daughter.
Oh, that's awesome.
She didn't sleep. She didn't nap. She didn't do anything. It was when you responded to my Instagram story and said, "Are you in my neck of the woods?" It was the first time that I sat up and I realized I'm in California right now. I don't even know where I am. I haven't slept. I'm just trying to keep my daughter from
what is this
irritating people on planes, and it was good.
Yeah.
Well, next time we're all in the same area, we'll have to try and find some time to sit down face to face.
I think I might be down there.
Might
be down there in May.
Oh yeah.
So I'll let you know for sure.
We'll
absolutely
come hang out.
Cool. I appreciate it. Thanks,
great.
Alex.
Yeah, thank you.
And
certainly.
Yeah.
Talk to you guys again soon.
Talk to you soon. Take it easy.
Take it easy.
Thank you for listening. The Cinetherapy podcast is produced by Inland Film Co. Special thanks to Alex Knickerbocker for joining us for a conversation on this podcast. We hope you look him up on IMDb and watch any of the wide range of TV series and films he's been a part of. If you are interested in connecting with Alex, we listed his social media accounts in the description of this page. We also linked off to Alex's YouTube channel and highly recommend you check it out. That's a wrap.